Ladies and gentlemen, today I stand before you with a powerful message that resonates deeply with the seasons we all go through in life. God said it's time to exit. When God says it's time to exit, we are not simply talking about a change in location or a physical shift in circumstances. It is a spiritual moment, a divine calling that signals a transition in your life. Life in its entirety is made up of seasons. Seasons of growth, seasons of rest, and seasons of change. And each of those seasons is designed with a purpose. When you hear that whisper or feel that tug within your spirit, when you sense the unmistakable pull that God is leading you out of one place to another, understand that this is not by chance. God does not lead us without reason. Every move has a divine purpose. The act of exiting is more than just moving away from what is familiar. It's about being prepared for something greater, something more aligned with the destiny God has planned for you. You see, often we hold on to what is comfortable, to what we know, because stepping into the unknown requires faith, courage, and trust in God's plan. But there comes a moment, a divinely appointed moment, when God says, it's time to exit. And at that moment, we must be ready to move forward. This is not a rejection of what came before, but rather a recognition that we have reached the fullness of what God had for us in that space, and now it's time to transition into a new phase, one that will fulfill a greater purpose. When we're in a season of waiting, or when we've grown accustomed to a particular environment or situation, it can be easy to assume that we are stuck. But the truth is, God always has a plan for us, and His plan unfolds according to His perfect timing. The moment He tells you it's time to exit, it signifies that the work you were supposed to do in that place, with those people, or in that situation has been completed. You have planted the seeds, you have watered them, and now it is time for the harvest to come in. The exit is not a failure, it is simply a sign of fulfillment. Fulfillment of purpose, of calling, and of potential. God is always moving us forward. He doesn't want us to be stagnant. He doesn't want us to get comfortable in a place that no longer holds our purpose. There are times in life when we can sense that we are in a season of waiting, or when we feel like we're treading water. But waiting doesn't mean we aren't progressing. It simply means that when the moment arrives, God is going to move us into a place that is better suited for the next step in His plan. His plans for us are always greater than we could ever imagine. When God says it's time to exit, He is positioning us for a season of growth, a season that will stretch us, that will take us deeper into His will. There is often fear associated with change, with the unknown. Leaving behind what is familiar can be intimidating, but we must remember that the unfamiliar is where God works His greatest miracles. The moment you exit one season, you enter into another, and though it might seem uncertain, it's important to trust that God's hand is guiding you every step of the way. He knows the way, even when you can't see it. His wisdom surpasses our understanding, and His timing is always perfect. Trust that He has prepared you for this moment, even if it feels uncomfortable or unsettling. God's call to exit is an invitation to step into His greater plan for your life, a plan that will lead you to places you've never imagined. When God calls us to exit, it is also a call to obedience. Obedience is not always easy, especially when it involves stepping away from what is comfortable. But when we obey, we align ourselves with God's perfect will. Our obedience in this moment opens the door to the next season of our lives. God's plans are not limited by the boundaries we place on ourselves. When we step out in faith, even when it doesn't make sense, we are positioning ourselves for the blessings, the opportunities, and the divine favor that God has waiting for us. Every step we take in obedience is a step toward fulfillment, purpose, and destiny. As we move forward into the unknown, it's important to remember that the exit is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of something new. It is the start of a season that will bring new growth, new opportunities, and new challenges that will shape us into the people God has called us to be. Just as the seed must leave the comfort of the soil in order to grow into something greater, so too must we leave behind what is familiar in order to become the fullness of who we are meant to be. In conclusion, when God says it's time to exit, it is not a sign of abandonment or failure. It is a sign that you have completed what you were meant to do in that place. and it is now time to step into the next chapter of your journey. Your exit is a doorway to a new season, one that will bring you closer to your divine purpose. Trust in the process, embrace the change, and know that God has gone before you. Your greatest days are ahead of you, and with each exit you move one step closer to the fullness of your destiny. When God calls us to exit, it is not a signal of retreat or failure, but an invitation to grow. Growth is often uncomfortable. It stretches us, challenges us, and takes us into places we would never choose to go on our own. But it is in those places, outside of our comfort zones, beyond the familiar, that real transformation takes place. When God says it's time to exit, He is not simply moving you away from something. He is creating space in your life for you to evolve into the person He has destined you to become. To grow, we must be willing to leave behind the things that no longer serve our purpose. Comfort zones, while familiar and safe, are not places where growth thrives. Growth requires change, and change demands that we step outside of what is known and step into the unknown. It asks us to take risks, to face fears, and to trust that on the other side of this transition lies the person we were always meant to be. Growth is not always easy, but it is always worth it, and sometimes the hardest part of growth is the willingness to exit from a place that feels safe, but no longer aligns with our future. When we are in a place of comfort, we often become stagnant. We stop reaching for more because we are content with where we are. But God, in His infinite wisdom, knows that if we stay where we are too long, we will miss out on the greater things He has planned for us. And so, He calls us to exit, to move beyond the limits we've set for ourselves, and into new environments where growth can occur. In these new places, we are pushed to expand, to stretch, and to discover strengths within us that we didn't even know we had. Exiting is also an invitation to evolve. Just as the seed must break through the soil to reach the light, we too must break free from old patterns, old relationships, and old ways of thinking. Evolution requires us to let go of the past, to release what no longer serves us, and to step into a future that is filled with possibility. We cannot evolve if we hold on to everything from the past. God calls us to move forward, to let go of what is holding us back, and to embrace the new that He is bringing into our lives. This may mean leaving behind people, places, or even jobs that once defined us. But it also means stepping into the unknown with a heart that is ready for more. Sometimes the people we are surrounded by are not ready to grow with us, and that's okay. Not everyone in your life is meant to walk with you into every season. Some people are only meant to be a part of the journey for a time, and when that time is up, God will gently nudge you to exit. When He does, trust that He is not only calling you to leave behind the familiar, but He is also calling you to elevate to a higher level of influence, understanding, and potential. Growth requires space, and sometimes we have to create that space by moving out of the places and relationships that no longer contribute to our development. The exit is therefore a process of expansion. When you leave a place or a situation, you are creating room in your life for the next phase of your journey. God wants to take you to a place where you can grow beyond your current limitations, where you can stretch and expand in ways that you never thought possible. It may be uncomfortable at first, but this discomfort is a sign that growth is happening. If you never step out of your comfort zone, you will never know what you are truly capable of. The exit creates an opportunity for you to push past boundaries and discover a new level of potential that has always been inside you, waiting to be unlocked. Exiting is not just about leaving, it's about entering a new phase of your life with the potential to evolve into the person God created you to be. You are being called to evolve beyond where you are now, to become someone who is more aligned with your divine purpose. The old ways of thinking, the old limitations, and the old fears must be left behind if you are going to fully step into the person God has destined you to be. So when God says it's time to exit, embrace the opportunity, embrace the growth that is about to take place. Trust that the discomfort you may feel is simply the growing pains of your evolution. The space you are about to enter is a place where you can expand, stretch, and become everything that you were meant to be. Exiting is not a loss, it's a gain. It's a gain of new possibilities, new perspectives, and new opportunities. The invitation to grow is a gift, one that will take you to places you never thought you could go. So, step into the unknown with courage, knowing that God has already gone before you to prepare the way for your growth and your future. The timing of God is something we often struggle to understand because it doesn't always align with our own sense of urgency or our plans. We live in a world where everything is fast-paced. We want things to happen now, and when they don't, we often feel frustrated or anxious. But the truth is, God's timing is always perfect, even when it seems delayed to us. When God says it's time to exit, it is not a random occurrence or an arbitrary decision. It is a divine appointment that has been meticulously planned long before we ever knew we would face it. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we are reminded that there is a time for everything under the sun. This means that every event, every season, and every transition in our lives happens within a specific time that God has ordained. We often hear the phrase, timing is everything, but for believers, we know that God's timing is the defining factor of everything. His plan is not subject to our deadlines or our understanding of time. He knows the perfect moment for everything to unfold. When we're called to exit, it's not just a signal that it's time to leave a situation or a place. It's a strategic move in God's grand plan for our lives. We may feel as if we are ready to move or that we've been waiting too long, but in truth, God is never late, and He is never early. He is always right on time. His timing is perfectly synchronized with the process that we need to go through in order to reach the next phase of our purpose. Sometimes God calls us to exit a situation, but we may not understand the reasons right away. This is where faith plays a critical role. We must trust that He has already prepared us for what lies ahead, even if we can't see the full picture yet. Just as a seed needs time to grow in the soil before it can break through the surface and bloom, so too does our spirit need time to grow before we are ready for the next step in God's plan. The exit point is often the culmination of a season of growth, preparation, and refining, and the timing of that exit is always aligned with our development. God does not push us into transitions until we have been equipped with everything we need to handle what comes next. When He says it's time, He is essentially signaling that you are ready, even if you don't feel ready. One of the greatest challenges in the walk of faith is recognizing the divine nature of God's timing. We often try to rush things or create our own timelines based on our desires or the urgency we feel in our hearts. We look at the clock and believe that we should be further along by now, but God's time is different from ours. His plans unfold at the perfect moment, when we are ready to receive them. It is a divine strategy. Our lives are not driven by happenstance or random decisions, but by a God who has designed everything with purpose and precision. It's also important to recognize that God's timing includes not just our readiness, but the readiness of others and the environment around us. He orchestrates not just our steps, but the steps of those we interact with and the situations that must align for us to walk into our next season. So when God calls you to exit, it's because everything is in place: timing, circumstances, and preparation. His plan is unfolding, and you are stepping into it at exactly the right moment. This is where we often struggle. We feel impatient and want to make decisions before the timing is right, but the timing of God is part of His divine strategy. He is preparing not only us, but everything around us for what is to come. His perfect timing ensures that everything aligns: our hearts, our circumstances, and our environment, all at once. This is why we can trust that when God says it's time to exit, we are not walking into chaos, but into a divine moment. There will always be moments when we question the timing. We might feel as if we've been waiting too long, or as if we are missing opportunities because things haven't lined up the way we expected. But trust that God is never early and never late. He is orchestrating everything in His perfect timing. Even when we cannot see it, He is setting everything into motion to create the ideal circumstances for us to step into our future. This is why it's so crucial to recognize the strategic nature of God's timing. It's not just about us. It's about His overall plan for our lives. We are part of something much greater than we can see in the moment. When God says it's time to exit, it's because He has already gone before us, preparing the way. And though we may not always understand or agree with the timing, we can always trust that it is aligned with His greater purpose for our lives. So when you hear God's call to exit, take heart. It's not a random decision, nor is it premature. It is a divine appointment, and everything you need for the next chapter is already being set in motion. God is preparing you, the people around you, and the situations you will encounter, all in perfect harmony with His plan for your life. Trust in His timing, for it will always be perfect, and when the time comes, you will be ready. When God calls us to exit from one place and step into another, He is not just asking us to physically move from one location to another. He is asking us to take a journey of faith. Exiting requires courage, trust, and the willingness to step into the unknown. It's a challenge because walking away from what is familiar, what we can see and touch, and stepping into something we cannot fully understand often feels overwhelming. Yet, this is where faith in the transition comes in. Faith is required because the journey ahead will not always be smooth or clear. There will be moments when the road seems uncertain and the destination is unclear. But it is in these moments that God is calling us to trust, not in the circumstances, but in His leadership. Faith is not about knowing exactly what is ahead or having all the answers to the questions we may have. It's about knowing who is leading us through the unknown. It's about recognizing that when God says it's time to exit, He is the one who has already paved the way, even if we can't see it yet. End quote. When God leads us to transition, He is calling us to a place where our reliance on Him becomes deeper. It's easy to have faith when everything is stable and predictable, but real faith is developed when we are asked to leave the familiar and trust in God's guidance, even when we don't know what the next step looks like. This is the very essence of walking by faith. It's about moving forward even when the path is uncertain and trusting that the one who is leading us is more than able to carry us through. In every transition, there will be moments of doubt. There will be times when fear tries to grip our hearts, especially when we don't have all the details or when we don't know what the future holds. But remember, faith is not the absence of fear. It is a decision to move forward in the face of fear, knowing that God is with us. It is trusting that He has already gone before us, preparing the way, and that His plans are always better than anything we could have imagined. Faith allows us to move with boldness, even when we don't have a clear view of what lies ahead. The Bible tells us in Hebrews 11:1 that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. When we step into a new season or transition, we may not always see how things will unfold. But faith is the confidence that what God has promised, He will fulfill. Even though we might be stepping into unfamiliar territory, we trust that God's promises are true and His provision will meet us along the way. The transition might be uncomfortable. It may require us to leave behind things or people that we've grown attached to. There may be moments of uncertainty or feelings of being alone in the journey. But faith in the transition keeps us moving forward, because it's not about the external circumstances, but about the trust we place in God's ability to lead us. When we trust in God, we know that He is faithful to guide us, even when we can't see the end result. This trust brings us to a place where we can walk in boldness and confidence. When we have faith in God's plan, we can step forward with a sense of assurance that He is leading us into something better. The unknown may seem intimidating, but knowing that God is with us every step of the way allows us to move forward with peace, even in the midst of uncertainty. In times of transition, we must also remember that faith is not a one-time act, but a continual decision. There will be moments when the path ahead seems unclear and we may be tempted to look back to what we know. But faith calls us to keep moving forward, to trust in the one who has called us to this journey. Every step of faith in the transition strengthens our trust in God and brings us closer to the fulfillment of His plan for our lives. Remember, faith isn't about knowing every step of the journey. It's about knowing that God is with you every step of the way. Faith in the transition allows you to walk in boldness even when the way ahead is not clear. It allows you to trust that the one who has called you to exit has already prepared the way and He will guide you through the unknown. When God asks us to leave one place for another, He is not only calling us to trust Him in the transition, but also to walk with confidence, knowing that He is in control of what lies ahead. So, embrace the journey with faith, for the one leading you is greater than any obstacle or uncertainty that may arise. Obedience to divine instruction is a critical element in any transition we face in life, particularly when God calls us to exit from one season and step into another. Our response to God's call, especially when it requires change, defines the outcome of our transition. When God says it's time to leave one place for another, He is not simply asking us to move physically. He is asking us to move spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. Our obedience to His direction is the key that unlocks the door to the next phase of our purpose. At times, the exit may feel uncomfortable. It may feel like we are being pulled out of a place of familiarity, stability, or comfort. It might seem like we're being asked to walk into the unknown, to take a step that doesn't make logical sense, or to leave behind people and situations we are emotionally attached to. But this is where obedience plays a pivotal role. Obedience is not always easy, but it is always necessary for fulfilling God's plan. Obedience to God's divine instructions during times of transition ensures that we are aligned with His purpose and that we are stepping into the destiny He has prepared for us. Our obedience is a declaration that we trust God more than our own understanding, more than our own comfort, and more than our own desires. Obeying God's call to exit a season, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable, is an act of faith. It's a step toward fulfilling the purpose He has designed for our lives. Just as the Bible tells us that obedience is better than sacrifice, 1 Samuel 15:22. It is our willingness to obey God's guidance, even when it requires sacrifice, that moves us closer to the fulfillment of our divine calling. God's instructions are always designed to lead us to a place of destiny. While the path may not always be clear and the process may involve challenges, we can trust that the journey is necessary for our growth and for the greater plan God has for us. Often we want to avoid the discomfort that comes with change, but it's in those moments of discomfort that God does His most significant work in us. The challenges we face during the transition are not obstacles to our progress. They are the very tools God uses to shape us, to refine us, and to prepare us for the next phase of our journey. Obedience is not simply about doing what God asks us to do when it's easy or when it's convenient. It's about trusting Him even when the process feels difficult or when we can't see the end result. The Israelites, for example, were called to leave their place of bondage in Egypt and walk into the wilderness. The journey was long, arduous, and filled with challenges, but it was in their obedience to God's instructions that they were eventually led to the promised land. Their exit from Egypt was not just a physical departure, it was a divine transition that required their trust and obedience to God's plan, even when they didn't fully understand it. When God asks us to exit, He is inviting us into a new place of purpose, but that invitation requires us to obey, even when the journey doesn't make sense. Our obedience is an act of trust, a sign that we believe in God's greater plan for our lives, even when the road ahead seems uncertain. Sometimes, the process of obedience may take us through difficult seasons, through trials and hardships, but each step of obedience is leading us closer to the fulfillment of our divine destiny. We must understand that obedience is the pathway to divine fulfillment. Our willingness to obey God's direction during the exit will determine the outcome of that transition. It's not just about leaving one place for another, it's about moving from one season of life into the next with a heart that is fully surrendered to God's will. Every step of obedience we take, no matter how small, is leading us toward the fullness of our purpose and destiny. Obedience also brings a deep sense of peace. It may seem counterintuitive, but even when the journey is difficult or uncertain, there is a peace that comes when we know we are walking in alignment with God's plan. When we follow His instructions, even in challenging times, we experience a peace that surpasses understanding because we know that we are walking in His will. This peace is the assurance that we are where we are supposed to be, even if the road is difficult or the future is unclear. In conclusion, obedience to divine instruction is not just about doing what God says. It's about aligning our will with His and trusting that His plan is always for our good. Even when the exit feels uncomfortable, when the journey ahead is filled with challenges, our obedience is the key that unlocks the door to our purpose and destiny. Trust that God's instructions are always designed to lead us to a place of fulfillment, and know that every step of obedience brings us closer to becoming the person He has called us to be. The transition is not just about leaving, it's about stepping into a greater calling, one that requires faith, trust, and obedience every step of the way. The exit is not an end, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with greater opportunities, deeper growth, and a renewed sense of purpose. It is easy to view an exit as a loss, especially when we are leaving behind what is familiar, what is comfortable, or what has been a significant part of our lives. However, in God's plan, every exit is designed to lead us to something better, something greater than we could have imagined. The reward of the exit is found not just in the act of leaving, but in the new season of life it ushers us into. When God calls us to exit, He is not leading us to a dead end. He is opening the door to new opportunities. Exiting a situation, a season, or even a mindset may feel like a sacrifice, but in reality, it is a divine invitation to move forward into a place of greater influence, greater responsibility, and greater connection to our divine calling. Sometimes we cannot see the reward when we are in the middle of the transition, but as we follow God's direction, we begin to experience a shift. New doors open, fresh opportunities arise, and we find ourselves positioned for greater impact. God's plan for us is always forward-moving, and each exit is a part of His greater purpose for our lives. The reward of the exit often leads to a season of restoration. The things that were lost or broken in the previous season are restored in ways we may not have expected. God does not just take us out of situations without putting something better in place. His restoration goes beyond mere repair. It is a deep renewal that sets us on a path to fulfill our divine calling with greater strength, wisdom, and clarity. The exit also brings with it renewal. Just as the earth is renewed in seasons of growth, so too is our spirit renewed as we step into new opportunities. God refreshes our hearts, minds, and souls in the process of transition, equipping us to face the challenges of the next season with a new strength. This renewal may come in many forms: a fresh vision, new perspectives, or a deeper understanding of our purpose. By embracing God's timing and trusting in His direction, we find ourselves entering into a season where the things that once drained us are replaced with life, joy, and purpose. A key part of this reward is the fresh anointing that comes with obedience to God's call. When we step into a new season, God equips us with new power and authority to fulfill the tasks ahead. Just as David was anointed for kingship after being chosen by God, so too does God anoint us for the next phase of our journey. This anointing gives us the strength, wisdom, and grace we need to navigate the challenges that come with the transition. It empowers us to walk boldly into the future God has prepared for us, confident that He has equipped us for what lies ahead. But perhaps the most profound reward of the exit is the fulfillment of our divine assignment. God's ultimate purpose for us is always tied to our calling, and every exit leads us closer to that calling being fully realized. By embracing His timing, trusting His direction, and walking in obedience, we move into the fulfillment of our divine assignment. The promises God has made to us, promises of hope, prosperity, peace, and purpose, are waiting for us on the other side of the exit. When we trust Him enough to walk through the door He opens, we discover that all that He has promised is not only waiting for us, but is ready to be fully realized in our lives. It is essential to remember that God's rewards are always greater than the sacrifices we make in obedience to His call. The rewards of the exit are not just material or tangible blessings, they are spiritual and eternal. When we move according to God's plan, we align ourselves with His will, and in doing so, we receive the fullness of His blessings. The new opportunities, the renewed spirit, the greater influence, and the deepening connection to our divine calling are all part of His perfect reward system. The things we gain through the exit are far more valuable than anything we leave behind. As we step into this new season, we may encounter challenges and obstacles, But remember that these are merely part of the process that leads to greater things. The road ahead may not always be easy, but the reward on the other side is worth the journey. God has already prepared us for what is ahead, and He will not leave us empty-handed. His plans are always to prosper us, to give us hope, and to bring us into a future that is greater than we can imagine. In conclusion, the exit is not a time of loss, but a time of gain. It is a divine opportunity to step into a new season of restoration, renewal, and anointing. Through our obedience to God's call and trust in His timing, we move toward the fulfillment of our divine assignment. The reward of the exit is the opportunity to experience all that God has promised, to walk in greater influence, and to live out the purpose He has designed for us. So, embrace the exit as the beginning of a new and glorious chapter, knowing that on the other side lies the fulfillment of God's divine plan for your life. As we stand at the threshold of transition, it is important to recognize that every exit is not a loss, but a divine invitation to step into something greater. When God says it's time to exit, it is not the end of a journey. It is the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with new opportunities, deeper purpose, and greater alignment with our divine destiny. Understand that the process of transition may challenge us, stretch us, and require us to leave behind the familiar, but this is all part of God's perfect plan. His timing is never in vain. He leads us with purpose, preparing us for a future that is aligned with His will. In the exit, we are called to trust, to move with boldness, to walk by faith, and to obey His divine instructions, knowing that He is preparing us for something far greater than we can see with our natural eyes. When we embrace the exit with faith, obedience, and trust, we step into the reward of the transition. A life renewed, a fresh anointing, a greater capacity to influence, and a closer walk with our divine calling. All that God has promised is waiting for us on the other side, and it is through our obedience and faith that we will reach it. So remember, your exit is not a setback, but a setup for the fulfillment of your divine assignment. Trust God's plan. Embrace the process and walk boldly into the future He has prepared for you. For in the exit there is a purpose. In the exit there is a reward. And in the exit there is the manifestation of all that God has destined for your life. Move forward with confidence, for the best is yet to come.